I'm Jessica Philippe from the South Central Regional Library Council, and before we get started, I just want to mention a couple of things. First of all, we're going to record today's presentation, and I'll be sharing a link to the archived recording by early next week. And secondly, there'll be time for questions during the presentation and when you type them into the chat box. As I mentioned before, just be sure to select all panelists and attendees from that drop-down menu so that everybody can see your question. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Terry Reese. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning. All right, so let's see here. So let me talk about what my intention is to do here. So we're going to go ahead and we've got an hour and a half. So I kind of thought that what we would do is we would go through a brief overview of the application, and that's going to include talking a little bit about how you go about, so I'm never quite sure what the audience level is. So we'll talk a little bit about just very quickly where you can install the program, what the requirements are. I'll let you know kind of how the program gets developed because I like folks to understand that because the program is very community-centric. I'm not a cataloger anymore. I used to be for the first 8 years when I worked in libraries, but I've since moved into other spaces. I use MarcEdit more of a research program, but I'm not an active cataloger. So a lot of the development that happens is driven by the community and through the MarcEdit listserv. And so I try and make sure that the community members understand kind of what the thought process is and how I develop the application because I try and keep it functional for a very broad community, about a third of which don't work with MARC 21. And then we will look at what happens when you get a set of records, go through some examples, and then have questions. So I'm going to grab my phone here so I can keep track of the time because I want to make sure that you guys have time to ask stuff, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. All right. So let's keep going here. So what I said I was going to do. All right. So I don't really want to talk about this. So I'm going to have this slide here if you want to know a little bit more about MarcEdit generally. From a history standpoint, I've been working on it for a very, very, very long time. In fact, this last, I think we're at 21 years now. Slide's wrong. So MarcEdit is used in a lot of places. I track the use of the program every quarter to kind of get an idea of if it's still being used. Since the pandemic started, I didn't update this slide for the pandemic because I haven't generated a new map. The program gets used roughly in an average year, I'd say about 2.5 to 3 million times. That's the number of times the program's been opened by an individual and it checks in with the updating service. I'd say since the remote work started and folks have had to redo their workflows, that number is significantly higher. Within the first 2 months, there were already over 1.5 million usage for that period. So I expect that while we're all in this period of remote work, the program will get used a lot more often, which is good because it means there's been some stuff that's been adjusted to make it work better, and it's a little bit bad in some cases because it means that I'm doing a little bit more support. So that's it's there. So just for folks to get a better idea of how the program gets developed, I try and follow 3 pretty simple rules. And so if you ask for enhancements, these are the rules that I apply in thinking about whether or not they're applicable for the application. The first one is it's a real-world tool, so the program does have functionality that's been developed for looking at what comes after MARC. It's in a special section of the application called MARC Next. I can show you what, we'll look at that on the screen. I'll kind of show you what those look like, maybe. Those are where I put things that are kind of experimental or things that I'm developing that are outside of what would be considered traditional workflows. Some of those eventually make their way into the main part of the program. Some of those stay more experimental, and that's kind of how within the application I continue to work with communities that are looking at what metadata looks like outside of MARC. So there's a number of pieces that are related to converting data to BibFrame, interacting with Sparkle, working with linked data work in that particular part of the program. But by and large, I try and make sure that the application solves problems. I get a lot of sometimes really esoteric kind of questions in terms of can or could MarcEdit do X? And the answer is a lot of times maybe it could, but it might only do that for this very niche outside case. And in those cases, we usually try and find ways to help. I usually will try and help a person find an answer another way. So I try and make sure that any development that happens solves real problems. MarcEdit's MARC agnostic. So this is actually really, really important and probably one of the biggest reasons why, at least right now, MarcEdit continues to be a closed source application. There's a lot of source code that I've written that I put in my GitHub account, a lot of it MarcEdit related. But a number of years ago, I did try to bring a number of folks in to help with the application development, and the problem that I ran into is a good deal of the community that works in the open source space also tend to be in the MARC 21 space. And a lot of development started happening broke the application for folks that didn't work with MARC 21. I find that too many of the tools that are in our community make assumptions around flavors of MARC in use. They're very Anglo-centric, and some of that has to do with just the broad number of libraries and the individuals that are funding the development. And so I've tried to make sure that MarcEdit works within what is essentially a very heterogeneous environment within libraries, where you have places that are using still national formats of MARC, that are using local character sets that aren't Unicode or MARC 8, that are using flavors of JSON or XML formats that aren't used within the MARC 21 space, as well as folks in our communities that haven't made the transition to RDA for whatever reason. And so MarcEdit, it tries to be very MARC agnostic. It follows the rules for ISO 2701, not the rule interpretations that are applied in them. Now, what that means is that means some of the work that gets done sometimes is more challenging for folks, because that means that if you care about things like field positioning, or you care about things like ISBD punctuation, then you're going to have to do a little more of that work yourself, because the program won't embed those rules into the application. It can be done. I'm actually happy that the ISBD stuff is becoming less important, so that's less of a problem. But that is one of the major rules that I follow, and so I apply every request to will this request break the tool for other users. Now, there are, with that said, a handful of things that are MARC 21 specific, and when that happens, I'm very clear that that's what's going on. And I'll actually show you where most of those live. We won't use them, but I'll show you where a lot of those live. The program has near universal character set support, and that's actually really important because we have a really big world of metadata. So a lot of folks use UTF-8, but a lot of folks don't. I work with a number of libraries in Greece and in other parts of the world, and they use local character sets. And so MarcEdit has to be able to translate seamlessly between one character encoding to another without losing data. And so the tool provides ways to do that through character set encodings to allow libraries to move data back and forth, as well as provides tools to help fix some of the problems that have come up with UTF-8 data, given the fact that there are so many different normalizations of UTF-8 that are supported, and that library software tends to support very particular flavors that may or may not be represented in your records, though you would never know until you actually uploaded the data into your catalog system. supports a wide range of metadata standards beyond MARC. And then I realized MarcEdit's part of a larger tooling environment. You shouldn't be doing all of your work in MarcEdit, to be honest. And so I've been trying to work on ways to develop integrations with other systems. So OCLC was early, Koha, Alma. I talk to other vendors on a regular basis, and when they're capable and have terms and have environments that I can work with, then I try and work on providing an integration path so that folks can talk directly to or with their ILS from within MarcEdit. So for example, a good example of that is Alma. Within MarcEdit, you can pull records directly out of the database, edit them, and put them right back. You could use it as a cataloging interface if you wanted to, as well as other tools like OpenRefine and Excel and things like that. All right, so what are some things that you can use MarcEdit for? So this is just a short list of things that I quickly looked at the MarcEdit listserv over the last couple weeks, and these were some of the questions that came up. So editing vendor records, e-records particular, facilitating large cleanup projects for things like subjects or name authorities, converting data from AACR2 to kind of a hybrid RDA, converting data in X number of different formats, reconciling MARC data using linked data concepts, validating headings, validating records, breaking records into big sets and small sets and joining them back together, managing, like I said, character encodings and Unicode normalizations, resolving inconsistent data sets through clustering, integration with your ILS systems, merging data sets from two files, so taking, say, like URLs from one file and putting them in another, retrieving data from remote sources like OAI, Z39.50, SRU. So a variety of things that MarcEdit's been designed to be able to allow users to do. And this is just a small set. And I should also note that MarcEdit is both an application and a tooling set. So there are a number of ways that you can automate the application using programming libraries if there was a group that was interested in learning that later. So some example tasks. So receiving data from a vendor, a library needs to convert to RDA, remove invalid URLs, validate subjects. So that's something you could do. There's all of those things are things that you can do within the application. Provide this is actually one that we deal with locally. A vendor provides a zip file with 1,000 MARC XML records that we need to turn into MARC records. The application facilitates batch processing of converting MARC XML and then joining those records together. A library requires UTF-8 data that's normalized to canonical normalization. If the data comes from lots of different sources, it's likely that data's normalizations are mixed. MarcEdit provides a way to facilitate that process into a normalized canonical normalization. Problems in large number of problems in a catalog affecting large numbers of records. MarcEdit doesn't have a record size limit, or not a record size, a record number of record limit. There isn't like a MarcEdit can only deal with 1 million records or 100,000 records or what have you. The tool's designed to work with as large of data file as you have. Essentially, your limitations is the amount of disk space you have on your system. The largest personal data set that I think I've ever worked with is about 100 million records with the tool. So there really isn't a size limit. It's really more limited by the amount of time it takes to process tasks. So if you're just starting working with MarcEdit, so again, I'm not sure about the folks' familiarity with the tool. If you're just starting working with MarcEdit, there's a couple of different places where you can look to find information about the tool. There's this workshop series. The MarcEdit website has a list of a number of different things. So this is a workshop series that I had done a little while ago, so some of the screens are a little bit out of date, but the content is basically the same. So a couple of different session types of targeting different kinds of data, different kinds of actions. MarcEdit has a knowledge base that I add to. This is on the website as well. So how to use things like custom report writer, formatting options, stuff about installation, scheduling, batch jobs, stuff like that. There's tutorials, and then I've been working on this. It's kind of a sample lesson plan with data, so I've been working on adding information about how you might work with MarcEdit with sample data. So ways to get you started if you're just starting out working with MarcEdit, or if you've worked with it before but work with it with a very specific part of the application, because I actually do find that's probably true. A lot of people who use MarcEdit, they use it for very specific tasks, and so sometimes the tutorials or attending something like this is an opportunity to learn about a couple other things that may be useful within their environment. How do you get help? I always like folks to know how to get help. So there's listserv. Listserv is great. Listserv is not something I maintain. I'm on it. I answer questions on a regular basis, but it's actually hosted by George Mason University, which is great. I tried hosting it early on, and for some reason it wasn't as successful as when the community decided to start hosting it. So George Mason is the host. There are a handful of listserv administrators that are part of the community that help to manage the list, and a number of folks on the listserv that are very knowledgeable, who answer questions all the time. And then I usually will try and pick up any questions that I see that don't get answered over the course of the day. You're always welcome to reach out to me directly. If you write to me on my Gmail account, that's the one that'll get to me fastest. I get a lot of folks who are working on projects but can't share data publicly that need help, and so that would be an opportunity to be able to reach out for help, especially if you need to be able to share data through something like Box or something like that, so I can take a look at what kind of problem you might be having. And also MarcEdit has a set of built-in help. So in MarcEdit 7, one of the goals that I had was to try and put help closer to the user. And so some of that is in these help links that show up in the application. They're there, and they will adjust themselves sometimes. And that's really to kind of help point of need. But if you think that the program does something but you can't remember where it would be put, you can ask the application. So let's say you know that the tool does delimited text data work, but you can't find it in the list. You can just start typing here, and then you'll get to see delimited text translator, export delimited text records, troubleshooting. So the tool has kind of a search mechanism built into it that does both search against the commands that are within the application, as well as kind of a natural language search against common topics that show up to try and surface that information for you. So if you're interested in things like, linked data, so here's like linked data rules and selecting tasks to relink, where can I learn more about linked data? So the tool tries to provide some form of help to allow to get you to topics or pull up the individual applications. And I find this really useful because even though I write the program, I rearrange things in the toolbars occasionally, and I lose track of where these things are inside the MARC processing library. So a lot of times when I want to, say, run the RDA helper or merge records, it's faster for me to just go like that and get to the merge record page than to go through the menus. Which actually leads me to one other thing. So MarcEdit is, because this question gets asked every now and again, so the application itself doesn't have a formal VPAT, which I know a lot of institutions are starting to require. The process for doing that is actually if you do it right, fairly intensive. But the program, especially MarcEdit 7, was developed with accessibility in mind. The tool has keyboard shortcuts for almost everything, and within the application, in the preferences, there is an ease of use page that allows you to restructure the application using themes, so it adjusts colors, font properties, removing styles, providing feedback with sound, setting up keyboard shortcuts and screen tips. The development of the application, when I did a lot of work adjusting from MarcEdit 6 to 7, was done with a number of researchers at Ohio State that specifically work with accessibility. And it was primarily to try and target one, making the program easier to use for folks who require assistive technologies, but also to try and find ways to make the program easier to use for folks who may end up using the program over long periods of time. And some of those things, some of the biggest changes with those were things like that I'd heard from folks were a desire to shift the theming of the application, because looking at the color scheme was problematic, and a lot of people liked this kind of more high contrast. I'm not a fan of it, but that was the ability to be able to adjust kind of the themes of what the application looks like, and not just take the built-in themes, but being able to actually customize them yourself. So you can actually customize the individual themes and set up font types and colors and all that good stuff within the application. So that was really a priority in the last iteration, was try and do more to make it easier for everybody to be able to use. Go back to my slide here. I think it was this one. All right, so let's talk about how the program gets installed and what's new, and then we'll kind of get into some examples. So the program in MarcEdit 7, to try and simplify the application for administrators and non-administrators, the program was broken into 6 different application types. Those are 4 Windows builds, 2 32-bit installations, one where you're required to be an administrator to install it, one where you are a non-administrator, and that was specifically for folks who worked within environments where maybe they were not given administrator privileges, wanted to use MarcEdit anyway, and so there's a 32-bit and a 64-bit install for both of those two. They're exactly the same program. The difference between them is that in the administrator install, when MarcEdit installs the application, it places the file extension registrations at the local computer level, so they apply to all users that would use the application. In the non-administrator installation process, the program installs into a special application space that Windows provides for program data for a particular user. And any installation things like file extension registration and stuff like that happens only within the user part of the registry. So they only impact that individual user that's logged into the machine. So in reality, you could have multiple users using the same computer, and only one of them may have MarcEdit installed, where it's actually available for use if you were to use the non-administrator installation. The non-administrator installation also really handy because everything is embedded into a single sandboxed install, so it's really easy to remove. MarcEdit 3 was the update on the Mac version. The macOS version requirements for the current version of MarcEdit is 10.12 plus, which is Sierra and higher. The reason for that change happened, I want to say, this last year around December. It was when Catalina was released. Apple made a change they made two changes, one for in the developers portal. So when you develop software with Apple, for Apple systems, if you want the software to install without throwing up all these horrible warnings, you have to belong to their developers program. And if you belong to their developers program, you have to follow a certain set of criteria. And their criteria essentially is that the tool needs to be notarized. In order to fit within the Catalina security work. And that notarization functionality breaks pre-Sierra. So that means for all intents and purposes, Apple has said that software developers should no longer develop software or support software that works pre-Sierra. And so because MarcEdit, because I work at it, because MarcEdit is designed for folks who are using the current operating system, and I work within an IT space, you know, and at an organization where, you know, our individual rules of the organization is no versions of Apple's operating system prior than the current implementation. So on our campus, we wouldn't allow a version of macOS to run prior to, I want to say Mojave. On the campus. So that would be, I think, 10.14. It's a shift that seems, you know, made some sense. I know that makes it difficult for some folks who are using Apple systems that are their personal devices, where they don't, they're older and can't update to Sierra. But unfortunately, in this case, the reason for the change was really related to some of the guidance that Apple's provided in terms of providing a secure environment for their systems. So 10.2 is the requirement. And then on Linux, it's basically any build that can run the current version of Mono. And how do you choose? Well, you really choose on your needs. And when you go to the downloads page, I try and provide some feedback on what you would use. So here's the downloads bit. Say you thought you needed 64-bit Windows, then you get this page here that basically tells you this is the non-administrator version, what does it do? This is the administrator version, what does it do? And you kind of try and figure out what works best for you. If you're in an environment where they manage the machines for you, they probably would always use the administrator build, would be my guess. All right. So one of the other new things that I put into the application, and it was really because I wanted to make the process fun. So when I worked on MarcEdit 7, it was called Project Fluffy Muppet because I like to name things that I work on. And as part of that process, I built into an installer agent. So the agent that installs actually was designed to replace the way that MarcEdit sets up in the past. So in the past, when you would use MarcEdit and you would set it up, the tool, the first time you run it, would start with this page. And that's kind of confusing because what I'm asking you when I give you this page is to tell MarcEdit a little bit about how you're going to use the program. Because remember, MarcEdit's MARC agnostic, so it doesn't know if you're using MARC 21. It doesn't know if you need data to be normalized. It doesn't know a lot of things. Now, there are default settings that set up for MARC 21, normalization turned on, those kind of things. But if you want to customize the experience as you go through, then the expectation was you would go through this preferences window on first run, and you would select everything that you need to have done. That was causing a lot of problems, to be quite frank, because people would open the program the first time, they would hit the button, and they would move on, and then they would run into issues where the program didn't do a certain thing because the expectations that were set were for a particular flavor of MARC or normalization that maybe wasn't true. So the process here is more wizard-based. You can skip it, like right here, and go straight to default settings, or otherwise you can go through a set of steps that will, one, make sure that you have a Unicode font, and if you don't, will allow you to download one that's free and open source from Google, and will embed it either into the program just for MarcEdit use, or will allow you to download it and install it into your operating system's font directory. allows you to set languages, because you'll notice MarcEdit here tries to determine what language your system's using. The program's been translated into about 28 different languages. We'll ask you about what flavor of MARC are you using. Do you need to have a particular normalization for Unicode data or not? Do you have an old version of MarcEdit, and should I help facilitate the transition of tasks from old version of MarcEdit to new version of MarcEdit? It really tries to kind of walk you through all the steps, so in the end you end up having a version of the application that's more useful to you, and hopefully the process is a little bit fun because you end up seeing different pictures of my dog as she kind of walks you through the process. All right, so that's a lot of kind of getting ready. So you have records. So you get a bunch of records. You have MarcEdit. So now what do you want to do with them? All right. So I'm going to go through and we're going to look at a couple of different things. So one we'll look at is this is a simplified workflow of what it might look like if you get records from a vendor. So and some of these you can decide to use or not use. So when I used to do cataloging all the time, vendor records tended to be particularly problematic. Some vendors were better than others, and so the process that I tended to walk through when I was working with vendor records, I would validate the records, looking for errors. I usually had two different sets of validation that I would use. One that was targeted for specific fields that I might be interested in looking at, one that was more structural. I'd break the records into MarcEdit's Mnemonic format so that I could edit them in the editor. I'd open up the edits the mnemonic file into the MARC editor, perform whatever edits that I needed to make. I usually like to save changes in between so that way I know that I have them. And then I'd compile the records and I'd add them back into my ILS system. So there's kind of this, general workflow that can show up. And I'll go ahead and I have a set of records. We'll kind of like walk through this workflow really quickly so we can see what that looks like. And some stuff here for your thing. All right, so let's go ahead and just walk through. I'm going to go ahead and walk through a set of records, and then I have a set of here of things that we'll look at. I'm going to set that page there so I can do it. All right, so I have a set of records. What I ended up doing was I grabbed records from as part of a set that I've worked on. Harvard provides a set of their data, and I randomly extracted 1,000, and so I'm going to use those for my work. So I'm going to pretend that these are vendor records that were sent to me and what a workflow might look like to process these. So just one second, I didn't mean to open that. I'm going to close that and delete that because I want to go through all the steps. All right, so the first step might be to validate the records to make sure that the records that I get are valid. So MarcEdit has a MARC validator. You can find it either under Tools, MARC Processing, MARC Validator, or my preference is to just say validate and find it that way. So the tool has a set of rules files. So this rule file here is basically just a text file. It provides information for the application that tells it, specific things. So like there should only be one XX in the field, 245, there should only be one of those. It uses those, collects those for information. The program will do very quick deduping of records to tell you whether or not it thinks there's duplicates inside the record. This right here tells me which fields to use for deduplication purposes. And then there's basically just rules here. So this is the full rules file. It includes information about all of the fields that should be present, whether they're repeatable, if they have indicators, what indicators are able to be used, if they're used, so blank or a 7, blah, 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 as well as subfields and whether those subfields are repeatable or non-repeatable. And all that information is useful for doing different kinds of validation within the application. So you can edit your own rules file. So it used to be that in cases where I was working with vendors, I actually didn't want to validate against the entire rules file. What I actually wanted to validate was I wanted MarcEdit to tell me if certain fields were present immediately. And so I would create custom rules files for different vendors. And so essentially you can use the template here cut it down and add only the fields that you want. So anyways, MarcEdit's validation works in two parts. The first one is to check the MARC record using the rules file. This will identify any fields that are in use or indicators that may be inappropriate based on the rules file, and you can group them two different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a file just so you can see what this looks like. I haven't run this against the Harvard set, so I'm not sure. Some of these are old files. They may actually have some errors, maybe not. So let's see here. So it runs it, hits 1,000 records. So these were the files that it had identified as potentially having errors. So in this case, the first record, for example, it thinks that in indicator 1 there's invalid data where the indicator should be different. You can go to that record directly within the MARC editor. To see what the data is. You can change it, the record, save it back. But the integration between the two, so you can see that kind of validation that occurs. And you can regroup the validation. So that was record by record. If I wanted to see them by error type, this will give me all of the records by the different kinds of errors that are identified. So I can group them differently. So that's one kind of validation. The other kind of validation, this was the one I was more interested in, was if the records were structurally valid. So a lot of times vendors would send records that if I tried to load them into my catalog would fail because there may be one or two records that were structurally invalid. And so this would allow me to process the records, and MarcEdit will tell me, are all of these records structurally valid? And if I found records that weren't, I could use this option here, and MarcEdit would remove the records that were causing the issues and create both a clean and a cleaned file and a file that had the errors. And then I could isolate the file that was clean, edit the records, and then deal with the files that were problematic outside of that process. So that's validation. So the next step, I usually, folks have different preferences in terms of what their next step would be. Most of the times I like creating different files. I go to MARC Tools, I select my file, and I process it and create a .mrk file. This file here, it's the Mnemonic file format, and that would be the file that then I would click edit, and I would edit inside of MarcEdit. You don't have to do that step. If the file is a .mrc file, you can go to the MARC editor and open that .mrc file directly. It has to be a .mrc file in order for this shortcut to work, and the program will break it automatically and allow you to edit the record and then save it back into either a new MRC file or to the original file seamlessly without having to do other stuff. All right, so I'm going to open up the MRC file, this file here. All right, so at this point I would get here and then I would do stuff with it. So I would do edits. And I'm going to show you a couple things because I want to, before we go to the actual edits that we're going to run through, just because I want to show you a couple of things. So inside of MarcEdit's MARC editor, in the edit box, this option here, edit shortcuts, these are often things that are more MARC 21 specific. And I've put them here because they are a lot of them are regular expressions that are sometimes difficult to do or are asked enough but are very specific to MARC 21 that I put them into this space. This is also where some of the things like cleaning ISBD punctuation live. So if I wanted to remove all the ISBD punctuation, I can use this tool here to have the tool go through and process that information. The second thing I wanted to mention, I'm not going to, I talked about normalization. If you are working with data that your library is primarily a UTF-8 institution, very likely you may run across data where the data looks like it's in Unicode in your system, but when you are in MarcEdit or in other systems, but when you bring it into your catalog, it may not display correctly. A lot of library catalogs formalize on a particular normalization. The Library of Congress uses NFKD. It's a compatibility normalization for UTF-8. It allows for the round trip ability of UTF-8 to MARC-8, MARC-8 back to UTF-8. And it's actually the recommendation for MARC-21 generally. If you read the specification, the data should be done in this normalization set. Not all vendors, though, prefer that as their UTF-8 normalization. Some of them prefer the canonical form, which the difference between the two would be that in the KD normalization, the compatibility normalization, let's say an E with a accent mark over it. In MARC-8, that character is represented as 2 data points. There is, trying to remember the order, I think it's the accent mark and then the E, or it's the E and then the accent, one or the other. But you have 2 different data points, one that represents the E, one that represents the accent point, and in systems that recognize MARC-8, they see those 2 data points and they put them together and render them on the screen as an E with an accent over it. Unicode, the compatibility Unicode format, the KD normalization, does the same thing. It creates a and I think that they swapped the order, so I think it's an accent mark with an E, but there are still 2 code points that represent those 2 separate characters, and again, when the system sees them, they combine them together to see an E with an accent mark. They obviously have implications for indexing. If your system doesn't automatically combine those data elements, it would index the accent mark rather than the characters joined together. But again, if you read the MARC-21 spec, particularly about the UTF-8 implementation for round tripability, particularly using things like the NCR notation for capturing UTF-8 data that lives outside of the MARC-8 spec, using the compatibility format is the one that LC in the specification recommends for MARC-21 due to the need to be able to move between the 2 character formats. Other vendors, though, have dropped that requirement and would prefer to use the canonical normalization, in which case that E with an accent mark is represented by a single character. And what happens then is most systems don't do normalization. They normalize for search, but they don't normalize for storage. So OCLC, for example, will allow you to mix normalizations. It'll take, say, a record from LC, which would be in KD normalization, but when I edit it in connection, it will input canonical text. And so I get a mixture. And in some systems, when I bring that in, it will show some UTF-8 characters and not others, or it'll impact indexing. So MarcEdit provides this functionality to be able to correct the normalization so that it's all in one form. And that form will be whatever your ILS catalog prefers. If you use normalization, though, you also need to consider UTF-8, the way that Unicode gets represented in the 880 field. This is exclusive to MARC-21. It's the 880 field is one of those things that just drives me crazy as a developer, because the 880 field shouldn't be normalized. It's not touched. And so this is a rule that helps MarcEdit understand what to do with this field because it's such an odd outlier. So inside the MARC editor, let's say I'm doing some edits, and I'm just going to quickly do something before we look at other stuff here. 6x. Let's say we delete the 600 fields, and then we save, and then let's say we delete the 300 field, and then I save, and then let's say, there we go. And then let's say I added a 999 field, so field A test, and add. Save. So let's say I did those things, and let's say I did a bunch of other stuff, and somewhere along the way, either one of two things happened. Maybe I invalidated my record, and now the program's having some trouble with the number of data elements, or maybe I realized I made a mistake 3 steps back, and I'd like to, but I can't undo those 3 steps. So every time I save, MarcEdit creates a recovery point. It timestamps the save, and it puts it into a location that can be recovered within the session that I'm working in. So let's say I did all of those things, but I ended up saying, you know what, I goofed up. I really want to revert back to the first version. I can go back and revert to the first save and pull that back into my screen, and now I'm starting from that point again. So I removed the 9 field that I added, and I brought the 300 field back and my 600 fields back because my first save point was prior to all that happening. So the program creates essentially restore points as you save the application. And that was done because a lot of folks in their workflow do save often as they're working through the tool. And sometimes when you do that, that eliminates some of the other parts of the application that would track edits that you could unroll. And so this allows you to roll back to old restore points. And when you close the session, the program removes those restore points. All right, so let's look at a couple examples. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take a look at just kind of a couple of different examples of things you might do within the application. So I'll show you the RDA helper because we still run into a lot of data that doesn't necessarily have good that tends to be in either AACR2 or pre-AACR2 format. We'll create a 500 note that allows you to automatically put the date in without having to enter it yourself. We'll delete all 600 fields that don't have a second indicator of 0, so you can kind of see how that works, and then we'll remove all the 9XX fields and just kind of walk through those, and then I have a couple other examples too that we'll walk through. All right, so let me grab that file again. Let me open the MARC editor. Just a little smaller for me. Let me grab my record again. Because I goofed around with it, I am going to actually recreate that file since I was saving stuff along the way. Just do this again real fast. And you'll see when I did that, it created a new file. The tool by default won't overwrite MRC files if they're, or MRK files if they already exist. It'll pick the next available file name. All right, so I have my stuff here. So let's say I wanted to start with fixing RDA data. So you'll see these are a lot of old files. They're pre-RDA. MarcEdit has an RDA helper. It can be run outside of the application or inside the application. So the RDA helper lives right here. If I didn't know where it was, I could type in RDA helper and open the application. So this is a bunch of stuff that you can turn on or off, decide which you want to use and which you don't want to use. And essentially it does things like add relator fields, generates 336, 337, 338, 44, 344, 45, 46, 47. The 380 is the form of work is kind of the one that is the most difficult to create in this space because there's not a controlled vocabulary for it. So I use one, but it tends to be broader than what a cataloger would assign. So you can check it on and off. 381, if it's appropriate, you can assess the 260, 264, decide if you want to use copyright symbols or not. I'll say go ahead. Qualifying statements, that takes data from the 020, 015, 024, 027 and moves data that's like in parentheses that are inside the subfield A, Z and moves them into the subfield Q, which makes more sense. Mm-hmm. You can add language of cataloging if you want to. process, the 502, so if you're working with a lot of theses and dissertation data, that takes unstructured data and restructures it, delete GMDs, or also generate, what did I do? Sorry. Generate GMDs, and then abbreviation expansion. So the tool processes abbreviations. You can edit the abbreviation list. MarcEdit updates that list automatically. You can also edit the fields that the abbreviations are expanded on. So this is the default field that I have on my list here. So when I'm happy with everything that's there, I can process the data or put it into a task. So I'll go ahead and process it. The program goes through and reads the file. So let's take it a second to go through the 1,000 records here. All right, so the RDA data has been processed, and what you see here is the 260 has been turned into a 264, 360, the 300 fields have been generated. So all of that stuff there, the subfield E got generated in the 100 field. So a bunch of stuff gets generated as part of the RDA helper. So the RDA helper tries to facilitate that transition from pre-AACR2, AACR2 to what we would consider to be a hybrid RDA record, since we're not actually looking at the record, looking at the piece to know that if we're needing to make any changes, but we're just translating to RDA concepts. So that's one thing we can do. Let's see here, adding a note. So adding data is pretty straightforward. MarcEdit has a list of global editing tools. They tend to be in the tool space. So the ones up on top here, these are standalone tools for things like generating call numbers. So let's say I had a bunch of e-records, they didn't have call numbers. OCLC has a service, I'll agree to it, that allows me to take these records and send them to WorldCat. WorldCat, the service that does this, will look at the titles, ISBN. I give them a bunch of data. They suggest back call numbers. This tool allows you to kind of step through different steps. So whether you want to have it run on all records, what the classification you're using, if you want to generate fast headings as part of the process, and then information about where you would put it. Only run this tool if, for example, other call numbers aren't present, all that good stuff. So you can automate that process. But these tools up on top are kind of standalone tools: call numbers, clustering, generating control numbers, linked data work, so building linked data into the tool, deduplicating records, RDA helper if you need to transliterate. So the tool has different transliterations built in that will transliterate data based on an automatic profile that's in the preferences. Tasks, and I'll show you I'll show you one here in a minute that I put together. Harvesting data from OAI, generating MARC records from URLs, normalizing data. And then these down here, these are kind of the general global editing tools that exist within the record. So we'll go ahead and go to the add field. So say I wanted to add a note. So I'm going to add two different notes. Let's say I just wanted to add a static field. We have to remember MarcEdit's mnemonic format. That format is field number, so whatever your field number is, two indicators if the indicators are appropriate, the subfield code, and the data that's going to be there. These are all add field function options, so we can insert it before, after, last. We can add the field only if it's not present within the record. We can add the field only if it's not a duplicate. So let's say we wanted to add something, but it's in some records but not others. We can add it if it's not a duplicate. And we can also add a field if another field or other data isn't present within the record. Or if it's present. So if I was to check this, then it would look for, let's say it was going to add a 9900 field, only if it found, say, a 906 field, or we could do it if it didn't find a 906 field. So the not statement allows this to be a negative, so only add it if the record doesn't have a 906 field. So the tool has some different options in place to allow you to facilitate different kinds of add processes. So we'll add the fields, and you can see the static field got added because I turned all the stuff off. let's say I wanted to add data like a date. So MarcEdit has some functions that can be used within the tool to facilitate adding information that is generated for you automatically. So the date would be one. So let's say I wanted to say 590, subfield A, catalog by TR, and I wanted to put in a date. So there's in the help file, there's a list of mnemonics that can be added. So in this case, we have date, year, month, day. And so what that does is that will automatically be replaced with the date. So I don't have to enter the date field. So we go ahead and add that, and we can see that in the 590 here, that date format was generated. So that's really handy, not so much in this context, but let's say I wanted to put it into a task. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that data, and let's go to tasks. Tasks in MarcEdit are kind of like macros in OCLC. I'm going to create a new one. Add my 590 note, paste the task action, save, and now I have a task that would add that 590 note. So if I undid that action, so my 590 note's been removed, I can go back here and run that task. It tells me what was done, and I see it was added. So that task now I could run anytime, and that date element would switch on a regular basis. I can also accept user-initiated data. So let's say I'm not the only person who's using this. Let's say it's going to be used by other people, and I want my cataloger tags to be variable. I can use input. I wrote this down because sometimes I forget what the format is right here. You can use this syntax here, input box syntax, which allows you to, again, have a secondary mnemonic, which will prompt for a cataloger's initials, so that way this is variable data that can be changed every time. So let's see what that looks like. So I can go back to tools, my task, and my 500 note. You'll see the first thing it asks is what are the cataloger's notes, their initials. And so it applied the data that it asked me for plus the date that it generated automatically, and then added it into the record. So I can create tasks that will essentially like little macros that run, and then allow those tasks to insert data. Is there a help file that contains a listing of the common syntax that people use? So there is, inside the knowledge base in MarcEdit, there's a list of the different syntax parts for the task, the special functions that you're allowed to use, because they get a mixture between regular expression extensions, things like this where you can ask for user input, as well as the date syntax. And the date syntax has a lot of different forms that you can use. They tend to be related to common date types, but yeah, I can before I send the slides out, I'll see if I'll try and find the page and embed them at the end of the slides so you guys can find them later easier. So that would be, let's see, how you add a 590. So let's say I wanted to remove fields, but I wanted to remove them on a specific type. So again, we have the add delete field. So MarcEdit allows the use of regular expressions in lots of different places, and this would be an example of regular expressions. So there's a number of, I did a number of shelter-in-place webinars at the start of all of this stuff, and one of them was specifically on regular expressions and determining scope within those expressions so you knew which field to use. So we'll look at this one here in particular. So let's say I wanted to delete based on second indicator. So we would identify the fields that we wanted to assess. So 6xx, that means every 600 field. And then we would use a regular expression. And the regular expressions then allow you to see everything from the equal sign forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, equals 6, and then we don't care which 600 field, so we're going to skip the next two digits. So that's going to be the 2 values plus the 2 spaces, that's 4, plus the first indicator is 5. So we're going to tell this regular expression we want the 6, then we don't care about the next 5 characters, and then we're going to delete anything that does not have a 0 in the second indicator. So this is a regular expression that would identify fields that do not have a second indicator of 0, and then I could tell it to delete those fields, and the tool goes through and removes fields that are missing a second indicator. So we'll see this one was not deleted, but others were 300 and some that didn't have a second indicator of 0. So that allows us to do that very quickly. Let's see here, and then remove all 9x fields. So this is more just to demonstrate syntax. So MarcEdit uses fairly common syntax for that catalogers use, and that would be 9xx. So that would stand in for all 900 fields, 95x. That would stand in for everything from 950 to 959. So when that type of syntax is used, and let's say I delete fields that are 9xx, I'm deleting all the 900 fields. So when I click delete field, the tool goes through and removes everything that's in a 900 field. So the syntax, and that's important because that syntax is used in other places. So let's say I went to subfield edit. If I use that XX syntax, the tool will apply the subfield criteria that I'm using against fields in that XX criteria. So these are the global editing functions. Let's say you needed something that was a little bit better than the global editing. MarcEdit does have a replace function. The replace function is probably the most powerful function because it allows you access to all the data in the record. That's done through what's called multi-line evaluation. I'm not going to do one because they're kind of difficult to do and you have a potential to lose data. What I actually wanted to talk about is the way that the tool tries to prevent you from having to use the multi-line expression evaluation, and that's in that a lot of cases when folks need to do record edits, they want to do something, but only if something else is either present or not present within a record. So the replace function has this option here, perform, find, replace if. And so this is kind of a pre-processing element that allows you to check a record for the presence of or lack of presence of specific data. And then if that record matches or doesn't match that first criteria, then the second set of find and replace elements will be done. And so this is actually a pretty cool function because this allows you to, again, use and, not, and or statements. So let's say, just for the fun of it, that I was looking for, and I'm just going to do has so I don't have to write a bunch of regular expressions. Let's say I wanted to perform a function, but only if a record had either an 050 or an 090, but not an, let's say, 082. What I could do is I could say not equals 082 and equals 050 or equals 090. So the way that this reads is it reads left to right. So it would first look for the not statement. So does it not have an 852? And if that not statement is true, then and does it have an 050 or does it have an 090? And if that criteria gets met, then this process works. So that allows you to actually do a lot of operations that people used to do with the multi-line function because they were trying to determine if specific things were in a field before they ran their replace function. So this allows you the option to be able to do a lot of pre-processing on a record before you do the actual changes in the set. And once you get something that works, you can click this Add to Task button, go into your task process, and create a task that will allow you to do that process over and over again. How does it do the order of ands and ors? Again, it's left to right. So it's going to do this one, and then it's going to do and equals 050 or this one. So this statement gets done first, and then it applies the statements after that. So the first one is going to be, it has to be the and statement then applies to both of these criteria. So and it's either the 050 or the 090 is how the process gets applied. And then there's one other tool within the program that's very unique, and that's, and I actually just wrote a help file for it because it's sometimes confusing, and that's this build new field tool. So sometimes we have to build fields that come from lots of different elements within a record. And we're not just copying subfield data, we need to move data around. So this tool allows you to create a pattern to essentially build a pattern for the record, and then the data will get pulled from different places to fill that in. So an example would be like an equals 949 if you were an innovative library that needed to pull data in. So let's say subfield A, and let's say I wanted to take data from, let's say, a 904 subfield B, and then let's put a pipe, and then let's say an 0590 subfield A, and then a pipe, and then let's say like a 250 subfield A. That's not probably what you would want, but let's say you needed to do that. So that would create a subfield A, and it would extract the individual parts from each one of those statements and put it into a single field. And so MarcEdit will build a single pattern for that data. If you have repeated fields and you want to create multiple fields based on that pattern, then you would use this new syntax where you put an X, that's a variable. And so now MarcEdit will create a new 949 every time it encounters a 904 subfield B, and we'll treat these as constants, and we'll pull that data into each one of the new fields. Again, this data exists inside of a help page, and because this comes up often, I wanted to create a page that demonstrated both the patterns as well as all of the functions that are available and how you create multiple fields and what the expectations would be around how each of those fields get created. Let's see here. This because I need to wrap this up because I want to give you guys time to ask questions. So let me see what other examples I had before I do. We talked about normalizations. So I'm going to show you just one more thing really quickly, and then we'll go forward. All right, so so one of the other two common tasks that get asked about in MarcEdit is how to take data and export it into Excel, and how to take Excel data and bring it back into MarcEdit. I'm not going to walk through the whole process, but MarcEdit has two functions to do that. One is export tab delimited records. Essentially, you pick a file, save it into a format. I happen to like tab delimited format because that's that reads well into other things. And then we just define the data that we want to extract. So field, subfield. So 940 subfield A, that will take the 940 subfield A. Let's say I wanted to take I wanted it to only take data that had a specific indicator value. This field data is read as a string. So if I was to say do 650 space, blank 0, that would take all of the 650 fields that had a first indicator blank and a second indicator of 0 and take subfield A. So that allows me to target a particular set of data. If I wanted to take control data, so let's say I wanted to take the 007, the program then allows me to target a position. So let's say position 9, a length of 4. So that takes the 9th position plus the next 4 bytes in that data element. So when I'm done, I click export. The data exports the data into a tab delimited format that then I can read into Excel. If I was going to do this often, I can save those settings, and then next time I come back, I just reload them into the editor, and I don't have to do all of the resetting up of the criteria. If I get data from a vendor that's in Excel file format or delimited format, I can use the delimited text translator. This allows me to pick an Excel file, and I'm going to see if I have an Excel file handy that I can just use to play with real quick. I usually save them in the XML format. Let's see if I've got one. Yeah, it really doesn't matter what's here. I'll just grab this one, see what's in there. So when you do an Excel file, it pulls in what sheets are available, so that way it knows what sheet to do, and then you would put an output format, so the MRC format that you want to output to. And then when you go next, the program pulls in number of fields, gives you an example of what data is in each field, and then you just basically map fields to MARC records tags. You can join tags together by doing things like this. Let me say 245 subfield A. So let's say I wanted these to join together, so these two fields needed to be on the same value. I could join them together, and now they're joined together. There's some options available in terms of the export. And when they generate a MARC record that's in the mnemonic format that then can be taken into the MARC editor and edited. So that way you can bring records from other formats into the application. And then the last one I wanted to show you was the tasks, because that's probably we just looked at it quickly, but I did want to talk about it. So one of the things that a lot of people end up asking me about is how to automate the tool. So tasks processing is the process that we use to automate things in MarcEdit. Tasks can have different formats, different actions. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a new task. So I want to show you a couple of things. All right, so when you create a task gets built like this. These are the options. You basically have this box here where you can build them from scratch. So all of the things that you're allowed to do in a task. So replace all tasks, new field, delete field, edit subfield, indicators, swap field, copy field, add a task list. That would be a group of things that are saved as a task that you want to use in another task. The RDA helper, link data task, build new field, edit shortcuts. In this case, you can do the case statements. You can clean smart quotes and HTML entities, math functions, remove blank lines, cuttering tools, generate cutters, generate Sanborn 3 cutters, or sort, and then sort the data by OXX fields or all fields. So those are all the operations you're allowed to embed into a task list. Tasks are kind of developed so that they're like macro recorders. So if I was to do a replace all task, the program generates a display in the Windows version, looks like this. In the Mac version, it basically changes the title that says this is a Mac, you're recording for a task. The data that you enter here gets saved into the task. Let's say you had something that you wanted to run lots of times. So for example, let's say I had a field, save that really quick. Let's say I had a field that looks something like this, equals 500. Well, let's just make something up. Subfield A test, subfield A test, subfield A test. Let's say I needed to chop those off and turn them into their own fields. There are ways to build those, but again, inside of the tasks. MarcEdit provides, let's say this operation here would have done that. MarcEdit provides scripting actions, which allows for control flow. So let's say I wanted to do this, I wanted to break that into 3 different fields. I would put this in a control flow loop and create a task that basically chopped one field at a time. And then the task would keep running this operation until all of the fields were in their own single point. So the control flows allow for that kind of work to happen. You've seen me do it a couple times inside the forms here, because it used to be that you would have to test and then you would have to go back and recreate what you were doing. Now if you create, say like a delete field task, you can just copy it and then go directly back to your task and paste it in. And if you need to move it into a different location, you can copy things between tasks. So let's say I did this and I thought, I really like that. I'm going to copy that action, and then I'm going to go to a different task and put it in there so I can move things between tasks. And I can export them. So tasks are designed to be portable. So let's say somebody in your office created a task that you wanted to share with somebody. You can select the task and you can go to export selected tasks, and then the next person would just import that task file that gets generated, and it brings it into their system. If you work in a closed environment, like everybody's in the same office, you can actually set MarcEdit up so that everybody in the office shares a task file. It's under locations, task folders. You can point that at a network location. All of you in the office point to the same location, and you'll all share the same tasks that are being used. And what the tool does is it creates a local copy that's used when you're offline, and links to the online copy when you're online and that network location is available. All right. So that's a very quick overview of kind of general functionality and some things, common things that I get asked about the application. I've got a couple things here that you guys can look at later. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, building tools. All right, so let's go ahead and ask questions. We've got about 13 minutes. So if there's any questions, go ahead and let me know and we'll see what we can answer.
Yeah, and you can either type them into the chat box, or if you prefer to talk, you can raise your hand and we'll be able to let you do that. And in the meantime, I know 2 questions came through the Google form. Terry, I think you addressed the one about the operating system, and then there had been another one about the Alexandria software, and you said maybe you would need some more information about that.
Yeah, so that one I would need to know a little bit more about how Alexandria exports data. So MarcEdit, like a lot of ILS systems, they work with very specific types of data. It sounded like the question was how to create MARC records from the export, in which case I'm not quite sure what the export data format looks like. If it's in delimited format, you could use the delimited text translator to translate that data into MARC. If it's in an XML format, MarcEdit does provide, in the MARC tools, a wide range of transformation formats. So maybe it's an XML format that needs to be translated. And if that format's not in this list, you can create one and register it with the application. Yeah, I'd have to see a sample file. They claim it's microlith. So microlith means a lot of things. I've seen different kinds of things that say that they're microlith. So that would be, I'd have to see what the format actually looks like. Because there's a plugin in MarcEdit to deal with things like CDISS, which also gets called microlith sometimes. So I just have to see the file to be able to take a look at it and see what kind of transformation needs to be done with it. Because my guess is it probably looks a lot like the old UNICEF used to create a program that would export into what was called microlith as a generic format. But if you want to send it to me, I can take a look. Has MarcEdit been updated to work with the recent changes to OCLC's API environment? So I guess the question would be what you mean by that, because MarcEdit's been working with OCLC's APIs before probably anybody else. It's been using them in a lot of different formats. It's been updated to work with OCLC's new authentication mechanism, which is OAuth 2.0 based. That actually causes a lot of problems for folks because OCLC themselves hasn't implemented that API implementation as the default when they generate keys for folks. So usually when people generate OCLC keys, when OCLC generates you a key, I usually have to tell them that you're using it for MarcEdit. And then once you have that information, you can go into the tool here and you just have to enter in the scoped data that's particular, because now everything is scoped based. So you would have to go through that process. And that's part of the reason why it requires that extra interaction. But once you do that and you validate the keys, then yeah, then it works fine with it. Let's see here. Question: have another suggestion? I use that for donor and donor codes, so another cataloging note field would be helpful for me. I'm just trying to follow what's going on here. What was that question? Multiple, in the programming it through this software. Okay. So I'm trying to. So I guess I'm not quite sure I understand what the question here is. So in the tool, you could create essentially a task that would allow you to enter donor codes per file, and they would be you would get prompted for that information. It would fill it in by default. You could also create things that would create different notes based on different donor codes. It would just be probably a replacement function that would run, and you could create a task that had all of them, and so it would just run based on that. I'd need a little more information if you wanted to have some help in terms of what that might look like. Let's see, what was the other question here? These things moving too fast for me.
The next one was asking where the Harvard Open data that you shared.
So Harvard makes that available to their data lab. So if you go to Harvard, it's like Harvard Data Lab, I think they provide 10 million records, I think. I've chopped them up and put selections in my GitHub account here because I need to have access to data records. So there are two different places where I've chopped up data. There's the LC data, there we go, data packs. Because I've had folks who are working in classes need to have data sets. So this right here is a link to Harvard's open data set, the Library of Congress ID, the Bibliographique Nationale in France. So different places where I get data sets that I can create data packs for use for folks who might be teaching library things that they need ready data for. So I provide data in JSON, MARC, MARC XML, EAD, as well as other serialized formats. Let's see here, any tips when being asked to get a how do you trust quote, which requires downloading, hold, okay, any tips on being asked to get a how do you trust quote, which requires downloading holdings for both monographs and serials from the CLC manipulating. So I'm not quite sure what Howdy Trust actually asks you for. So within the application, you can certainly use the OCLC API and target lookups for particular data under your code. But I'm not quite sure what the I don't know honestly what HathiTrust asks for, so for a quote. So I need a little more information to kind of walk through and see what might be possible. So you're welcome to ask offline, and I could try and see if I could help. But that one I'm not quite sure how I'd answer that. And then is there an older version of MarcEdit for macOS that would run on pre-Sierra systems? Not one that's supported. I do keep on the download pages older versions of MarcEdit because I do freeze the program when I move it to different versions. So you'll have, so like here's previous builds, so that's 2792, but you can go to the previous builds page, I believe. You would have to find it. Probably this one. It's a DMG, but that might be before the switch happened because it's 2019-01. But no, I haven't been keeping one. And the reason for that is the macOS build changed significantly between MarcEdit 2 and MarcEdit 3 because it was a version of the application I was building from scratch. So there was a lot more changes that were necessary as I went through it because it's a native build of the application. So really, you might be able to find a pre-Sierra version in the previous builds, but I would have a hard time recommending using it. And that's unfortunate because I realize there are folks who use older versions of Mac systems, but that's kind of the place where I'm at.
Well, thank you, Terry. I'm not seeing any other questions. So thanks for being with us today.
Yeah.
And best of luck with reopening your institution.
Yeah, we're working on it. All right, so like I said, if there's any questions, you guys have my email address. I will pull these slides together with a couple of notes added for links to help pages for folks for later, some things we talked about. But otherwise, if there's questions, there's a listserv, and like I said, you're welcome to send data to me directly or questions directly if you have them. So.
Great. And yeah, I'll be sharing out the slides as well as the recording to this presentation sometime early next week. So thanks so much, everybody. Take care, everyone.
Okay.